I had barely stepped out of the taxi when I saw them. My father and my older brother, leaning on the front porch railing like they'd been waiting all day for the show to start. My sea bag was still on my shoulder, my boots still dusty from Okinawa. I hadn't even taken 3 steps toward the house when my father said it. "You're homeless now." Just like that, no hello, no welcome home, kiddo. Just a sentence that hit harder than any blast wave I'd felt downrange. I stopped in the middle of the driveway. My house looked the same, white siding, trimmed hedges, the flagpole I'd installed after my second deployment. It all looked normal, quiet, safe. My brother Chad took a swig of beer and smirked. "We sold the house, sis. Try to keep up." They laughed. My own father, my own brother, laughing while I stood there with a deployment still clinging to my skin and jet lag buzzing in my bone. I swallowed the burn in my chest. "What are you talking about?" I asked. My father pointed casually at the front door like this was just a game. "Your brother needed help. Family sacrifices for family. You weren't here. You didn't need the place. You Marines bounce around anyway. What difference does a house make?" I should have exploded. I should have screamed. Should have dropped my bag and fallen apart right there in the yard. Instead, I smiled, slow, steady, the kind of smile that makes people nervous because they can't read it. My father's eyes narrowed. "What's so funny?" I met his gaze and said, very softly, "The house you sold was actually—" I let the words hang in the air. I watched both of them shift just a little. But before I tell you what I said next, I need to take you back. Because this didn't start on that porch. It didn't start with a sold sign or a smirking brother or a father who forgot what loyalty looks like. It started months earlier, in Okinawa, with a message I ignored and a truth they never expected me to uncover. And the part they really didn't expect, I knew they'd done something long before I set foot in that driveway. My name is Maria. I've been a Marine for 13 years. I grew up in a small Washington town where people mow their lawns on Saturdays and wave at neighbors they secretly judge on Sundays. My father was the kind of man who used to wake me up at 5 a.m. to make me eggs before school. My mom, before she passed, was the strong one. She had that quiet fire, the kind that doesn't shout, just burns steady. I got that part from her. My brother Chad, well, Chad got something else. He was the still figuring it out project. The one always in between jobs, in between plans, in between promises. Growing up, I watched my dad bail him out over and over. Late rent, broken cars, bad decision. And somehow, it was always not his fault. When I turned 18, I chose structure. I chose the core. I chose early mornings, sand in my teeth, discipline pressed into my bone. My dad cried at my boot camp graduation. He hugged me like he was afraid I'd disappear. Back then, I believed he was proud. After my second deployment, I bought the house. My house, nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, modest yard, worn wooden porch. But it was mine. I used my VA home loan, signed every paper myself, painted every wall with my own sore hand. That place was my anchor. When the world felt loud and chaotic, I knew that porch would be there waiting. For 8 years, every time I came home there. My boots would hit that same driveway. My key fit the same lock. The flag outside reminded me why I kept going back. But over time, my relationship with my father shifted. At first, our calls were easy. He'd ask about my unit, I'd ask about his back pain, and what game Chad was obsessed with that month. Then slowly, the tone changed. Whenever I called, Dad sounded irritated, like I was interrupting something. I'd hear voices in the background, laughter, glass clinking, sometimes yelling. Chad had moved back in with him, temporarily, after losing another job. Temporary with Chad always meant until someone else paid. Every time I asked how things were going, Dad defended him. "He just needs time. He's working on it. Don't be so judgmental, Maria." Once, during a call, I heard someone shout in the background, "Did she send the money yet?" The line went dead 2 seconds later. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself distance makes things sound worse than they are. I was halfway through a 6-month rotation in Okinawa when the first real warning came. A text from my father, just 6 words. "Call us before you come home." No punctuation, no emojis, no love you. I stared at it for a long time, that cold little knot forming in my stomach. Something was wrong. I just didn't know yet how wrong. Okinawa was supposed to be simple. Shore duty, predictable schedule. No surprise deployments, no middle-of-the-night alerts. Predictable is rare for Marine. I was looking forward to it. On my evenings off, I'd step out onto the barracks balcony, feel the humid air stick to my skin, and call home, just to hear the sound of my own country through the phone, just to make sure my house, my anchor, was still standing. But every call felt off. Sometimes Dad wouldn't pick up. Sometimes he'd answer on the third ring and rush me off the phone. Sometimes I'd hear whispered voices behind him, then a chair scraping, then silent. "Everything okay?" I'd ask. "Fine," he'd snap. "We're busy. How's Japan?" That word, busy. Busy with what? One night, my phone buzzed with a notification while I was heading back from the chow hall. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the subject line: Property Ownership Activity Alert. My steps slowed, the hallway noise faded. Marines walked past laughing, shoving each other, but their voices turned into static. So I opened the email. It was short, dry, no drama, no explanation, just confirmation that an ownership update had been processed on my property. Not completed, not finalized, just updated. There was another name attached, faded in the system, a partial entry, like someone had started a transfer they weren't allowed to finish. My stomach turned cold. I immediately called my father. No answer. Called again, straight to voicemail. I tried Chad, nothing. For the first time in 13 years of service, I felt more afraid of a piece of paper than any weapon I'd ever trained with. The next day, during my lunch break, I swallowed my pride and walked into the JAG office on base. I asked if anyone had a few minutes. One of the officers, a calm man with tired eyes, sat me down. "What's going on, Staff Sergeant?" I told him everything. The house, the email, the new name on the record, my father's power of attorney. He didn't panic, he didn't look shocked. He just asked one quiet question. "Who holds your POA?" "My dad," I said. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise, recognition. He'd seen this before. He leaned back and said, "Trust is good. Oversight is better." Those words slid under my skin and stayed there. He told me how to request the full transaction history from the county, showed me which forms to fill out, which office email to use, the exact wording so the request didn't get lost. That night, after lights out, I sat on my bunk with the glow of my phone lighting up the sheets and sent everything. Every form, every detail. A week later, the file arrived in my inbox. I opened it alone, sitting on that same balcony, the Okinawa night buzzing with cicadas. I expected a glitch, a mistake, some harmless clerical error. Instead, I saw my father's signature. Over and over and over. Dates circled my deployments. Authorizations signed just days after he told me how peaceful the house felt. Money transfers linked to an account with Chad's name on. The kind of cold that hit me then had nothing to do with weather. It was the kind of cold that comes when you realize the people you thought were guarding your home were the ones picking it apart while you were gone. I called my father from the office phone the next day so he wouldn't recognize the number. He answered on the second ring, cheerful, too cheerful. "Hello, did you sell my house?" I asked. A silence, not static, not a dropped call, just a pause that stretched so long I could hear my own heartbeat. Then he said, "Before you get upset," I hung up. I didn't trust my voice, didn't trust myself not to scream, not to sob, not to say something I couldn't take back. For the next few days, he called and texted nonstop. I let it all go unanswered. I needed space between my fury and my decision. But I wasn't ignoring the problem. I was studying it. The county file told me everything. The dates of the sale, the rushed paperwork, the buyer's name, Benson. So I knew that name. He'd been hovering around my father for years. The "I know a guy who knows a guy" friend, always bragging about flipping property, always working in the gray area. I traced every signature, every authorization, every deposit that landed in Chad's account. By the time my deployment ended, the anger felt different. Less like a wildfire, more like a laser, focused, controlled. I didn't tell my father I was coming home. Didn't tell Chad. Didn't tell anyone. I landed quietly, rented a car, and drove straight to the county recorder's office with my sea bag still in the trunk. The clerk behind the glass window was an older woman with tired eyes and a kind voice. When I slid my ID across and asked for everything tied to my property, she glanced at the address, then at me. "You're the Marine, right?" she asked. "Yeah." She nodded slowly. "Thought so." 2 hours later, I walked out with a folder so thick it barely closed. I sat in my car and flipped through page after page. And there it was. The sale, the price, the rushed transfer. My father listed as having authority. No attorney of mine on record. No VA clearance noted. And I felt sick. But underneath, The sickness was something else. They had messed up badly. See, that house wasn't just any house. It was a VA-backed property. That meant layers of rules and protection, layers they'd skipped. They thought I was powerless because I was overseas. They thought a piece of paper called Power of Attorney made them untouchable. They were wrong. I checked into a cheap motel that night. Buzzing neon sign, thin walls, scratchy. I laid every document on the bed like pieces of a puzzle. By the time the sun came up, I had something my father and brother never expected me to have. A plan that didn't involve yelling. A plan that involved the law. The next day, I drove to my old neighborhood, parked at the end of the street. My house looked smaller, or maybe I was just seeing it clearly for the first time. There was a new car in the driveway, a children's bike near the porch, and when I stepped out of the taxi later, sea bag on my shoulder, I saw them waiting for me on that porch. My father, Chad, both smirking like they'd won. They thought I was walking into their victory. They had no idea they were standing on a trap they built themselves. Standing in that driveway, listening to them brag about selling my house, I felt something unexpected. Not shock, not confusion, confirmation. They were exactly who the documents said they were. My father waved his hand, dismissive. You'll buy another one. You make good money. Your brother needed help. That's what family does. Family. People love that word when they're taking from you. I didn't argue, not really. I asked questions. Calm ones, quiet ones, the kind that made Chad's eyes flicker and my father's jaw tighten. Was it gambling this time? I asked. Or something worse. Dad exploded. Stop interrogating your brother like he's a criminal. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Someone sold my home without me, I said. Someone took money that wasn't theirs. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. Right then, the front door opened. A woman stepped out. Blonde hair, sweatpants, a mug that said Mama needs coffee. She looked too gentle to be part of this mess. I'm Emily, she said, unsure. The new owner. New owner. The words hit me, but they didn't knock me down. Instead, they sharpened something inside me. Congratulations, I told her, still oddly calm. Did they tell you everything? My father flinched at that. Chad stopped smirking. Emily looked confused. Everything. I turned my gaze back to my father and brother. Let the silence stretch. Let them feel it. Then I said, did they mention that legally they never had full right to sell this place? Emily's fingers tightened around her mug. What do you mean? My father has power of attorney, I explained, still watching him. That lets him help with bills and emergencies. It doesn't give him the right to sell a VA-backed home without certain federal steps being followed, steps that were never taken. My father's voice cracked. Maria, stop. That was the moment I knew I had them. Not because he yelled, because he pleaded. I didn't go inside that day. I walked away instead, checked into a motel, ignored my father's calls, and I started sharpening my revenge. It didn't look like a movie. No dramatic music, no slammed doors. It looked like photocopies, emails, and quiet conversation. I called the JAG contact in Okinawa, asked clarifying questions. He answered every one, calm, straightforward. I organized everything into folders. A POA abuse, a VA regulation, a transaction record, and text screenshots. Then I called Emily. She sounded shaken, but she listened. I explained what a VA home loan meant, what power of attorney didn't allow, how Benson's name kept showing up in all the wrong places. This isn't just a family argument, I told her gently. This is fraud, and you got dragged right into the middle of it. She whispered, what do we do? Not what do you do? What do we do? That's when I knew I wasn't alone in. We get lawyers, I said. We go to the sheriff. We let the law speak louder than anyone's excuses. Revenge, for me, wasn't about screaming on that porch. It was about making sure the next Marine, who went overseas with a POA in place, wouldn't be this easy a target. They thought they used my service against. They were about to find out what happens when a Marine uses the system for herself. The next morning, the air over the neighborhood felt heavy. Emily stood on the porch waiting for me, a folder clutched to her chest. Her attorney's card peeked out from the edge. You sure about this? She asked as I walked up. No, I said honest, but we're doing it anyway. Before we could say more, my father's truck pulled up. Chad jumped out first, eyes bloodshot, jaw tense. My father climbed out slower, shoulders hunched like the gravity around him had doubled overnight. We weren't alone. A sheriff's deputy car rolled to a stop at the curb. The same older deputy who'd thanked me for my service when I first registered my address stepped out. Morning, Lawson, he said quietly. Morning, I replied. We all gathered in the yard, no one on the porch, no one in the house. Neutral ground. The deputy cleared his throat. We're here to get some clarity about the property transfer. Everyone will have a chance to talk, But first, Maria, can you summarize your concern? I didn't look at my father when I spoke. I looked at the deputy, at Emily, at the house. My father held power of attorney while I was deployed, I said. He used it to sell a VA-backed home without my consent, without proper authorization, and with the help of a known flipper who's already on your radar. Funds were sent directly to my brother's account. The process bypassed key regulations, which makes the sale questionable, if not completely invalid. Chad scoffed, "You're making it sound criminal." The deputy glanced at him. "Son, if it walks and talks like a crime." My father finally spoke up. "I didn't know it was illegal. I just knew my boy was in trouble. There were people after him. He had debts, real ones." The deputy looked at him, then at me. "Is that true?" I nodded once. "I don't doubt the debt was real, but so was the house." My father's voice rose, desperate. "I did what I had to do for my family." I turned to him. "You had a choice. You could have called me. You could have waited. You could have sold your truck, your tools, your pride. Anything but the one thing you knew was mine." His face crumpled. Chad looked away. Emily's attorney, who'd arrived quietly during the exchange, stepped forward. "My client was led to believe that this was a clean, legal sale. She was told the owner, this marine right here, had agreed to it. That was false. She has legal grounds to void the sale and pursue damages against everyone involved who misrepresented the situation." The deputy nodded. "And Benson, already being contacted," the attorney said. "We'll handle him through the proper channel." The wind rustled the trees. A dog barked in the distance. The world felt painfully normal while my family came apart at the seam. The deputy took a deep breath. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm filing a report today. The documents you provided will go to the county prosecutor. Until this is sorted, neither of you," he gestured to my father and Chad, "are to interfere with this property or with this woman." He pointed to Emily. My father's shoulders slumped. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I didn't do this," I said quietly. "You did, I'm just not covering it up." His eyes met mine then. For a second, I saw the dad who used to hold my hand crossing the street. The man who used to say, "I'll always protect you, kiddo." That man was nowhere to be found now. Only the consequences stood in his place. The weeks that followed moved slowly, like wading through cold water. Reports were filed, statements taken. Every decision my father and brother had made was pulled apart and laid on a table for strangers to examine. Benson disappeared for a couple of days until the sheriff's department picked him up at a friend's trailer. He came in angry and left quiet when he realized how much paper proof stacked against him. Emily and her husband met with attorneys, county officials, and a VA representative. The more they learned, the more shock turned into steady determination. "I just wanted a home," she told me one afternoon outside the courthouse. "I didn't want any of this." "I know," I said. "Me too." The sale was officially declared invalid. The county's emergency fraud fund stepped in to help Emily and her husband while they pursued restitution from Benson and, potentially, my father. As for my house, it remained mine on paper. The law had caught up to what my gut already knew. Moving back in wasn't simple. The process took months. There were inspections, more signatures, more waiting. During that time, I stayed in a small rented apartment with thin walls and no history. It felt like limbo. I saw my father a few times, in hallways, in parking lots, once on the sidewalk outside the courthouse. He looked older every time, not just in his face, but in his posture, like regret had weight and he was finally feeling all of it. One day, he asked if we could talk. Not in a parking lot, not in some hallway, at the house. My house. We met in the yard. No deputy this time, no lawyers, just the two of us and the walls that had heard every version of who we'd been. He didn't try to hug me, didn't smile. "I thought I was saving him," he said. His voice cracked. "I truly believed if I didn't step in, he'd lose everything. I could have said a lot of things. Could have told him Chad needed to lose something to finally change. Could have told him you can't save someone who's comfortable drowning as long as someone else pays the price. Instead, I said, you stepped in front of me to shield him. But to do that, you pushed me off the cliff." Tears filled his eyes. "I know, God, Maria, I know, and I can't take it back. I can only face what comes." He did face it. He sat through every meeting, gave every statement, didn't try to lie, didn't pin it all on Chad, even though he could have. The prosecutor decided not to push for the harshest charges, partly because of his cooperation, partly because he'd never been in trouble before. Benson took the brunt. Chad was forced into financial counseling and debt programs as part of an agreement. Nothing about it felt like victory. It felt like stitching up a wound you never should have had in the first place. The day I finally walked back into my house with the keys in my palm and no one else's name hovering over my deed, I moved slowly. The living room was empty. Emily and her family had already moved on to a different place, one that was truly theirs. We still texted sometimes. Two women tied together by a house and a man who lied. I ran my fingers along the wall where my medals used to hang. The small dent in the floor where I dropped a toolbox years ago was still there. The scratch on the doorframe from hauling my dresser alone. The house remembered me. I stood in the middle of the living room and breathed in dust, paint, and something that felt like closure. I didn't get my old life back. You never really do. But I got something else. My space, my boundaries, my voice, and for the first time in a long time, my home was actually mine. People like to say blood is thicker than water, as if family can do no wrong. What they forget is this: blood can stain too. My father and brother used my service as a chance to take from me. They looked at my uniform and saw stability, not sacrifice. They looked at my house and saw a quick fix, not the years I'd poured into it. For a long time, I carried this quiet belief that being the strong one meant I could handle anything they threw at me, that I should be the one to bend, to forgive, to understand. But strength isn't about how much you can lose without breaking. It's about how firmly you stand when you finally say, enough. Filing that report didn't feel good. It felt necessary. Holding my father accountable didn't erase our history. It didn't cancel the early morning breakfasts or the proud hug at my boot camp graduation. It just told the truth about who he chose to be this time. Sometimes the people who raised you forget you grew a spine of your own. Sometimes the brother they've always rescued has to sit in front of a public defender and see what his choices really cost. Sometimes the man who says, "We're family," has to stand in a courtroom and realize family doesn't put you above the law. If you're listening to this and something inside you aches because you know what betrayal feels like, hear me clearly. You are not dramatic for protecting what's yours. You are not heartless for setting boundaries, even with blood. You are not disloyal for choosing truth over silence. Family can fail you. Friends can turn their backs. The people you trusted most can become the reason you don't sleep at night. But their choices do not rewrite your value. They didn't make me less of a Marine when they sold my house. They didn't make me less of a daughter when they lied. They just revealed who they were when temptation knocked. If you ever find yourself standing in a driveway, metaphorical or real, being told you've lost everything, pause. Breathe. Look closer at the paperwork in your life, the patterns, the excuses, the stories you've been handed. You might discover, like I did, that you're not as powerless as they want you to believe. And if my story feels like yours, if you've had to stand up alone, know this: you're not weak for hurting quietly. You're not wrong for finally speaking loudly. And you are never, ever wrong for choosing yourself in a house full of people who wouldn't choose you back.